Hello, good morning. Welcome to Ask the Expert, a daily series from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. to help small businesses. You can ask me any questions in the comments or using the hashtag QBATE on Twitter. If you need any more advice, please join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. During the live session, we will be running a poll, so please do engage with it, and in the end, I will share the results with you. So I'm Toby Mildon, and I am a diversity and inclusion consultant. I work with HR directors and chief executives to enable them to design and implement their own diversity and inclusion plans. I'm the author of a book, Inclusive Growth, which provides a framework for business leaders on how to implement diversity and inclusion in a sustainable way. Most recently, I've been working with clients like HarperCollins Publishing, doing some introduction to diversity and inclusion training. And I've also been working with Energy Northwest, just near Manchester, helping them do an audit of their current diversity and inclusion activities and putting a strategy together. So I work with clients in both the public and private sector, small and large. I created my business to really address one of the United Nations sustainability goals, which is about creating decent work and economic growth around the world. So before I got into diversity and inclusion, I actually worked in technology. I was an IT consultant for Accenture. I worked in healthcare technology, and then I became a technical project manager at the BBC. And I had my own experiences of exclusion. So I was born with a rare neuromuscular disability. And it means that I have 24-hour care and I'm using a wheelchair all of the time. And, I've had some experiences working in the workplace. So, for example, when I was working fresh out of university, I was working in consultancy, and one of my clients banned me from their office because they said that I was a fire risk in my wheelchair. I haven't been able to go to Christmas parties because they've been organised in inaccessible venues. And when I've tried to do some career changes in the past, I've had mentors who've told me, things that I'm unable to do because I'm a wheelchair user. But none of these things have really held me back. And actually, a lot of these experiences have informed, a lot of the work that I do in creating more inclusive workplaces and for everybody. So I got into diversity and inclusion at the BBC. I was working in the technology and engineering department, and as a technical project manager. And I was working with our chief operating officer, who was concerned about the gender imbalance within the tech sector. We were in pretty much in the same boat as Facebook and Google and Twitter when it came to gender balance within technology roles. So I worked with our chief operating officer to create our gender balance action plan and implemented that. And that's when I realized that I really loved working in the field of diversity and inclusion. Luckily at the BBC, I was able to do a career change and a sideways move. And I then moved into a more central HR function. Whilst I continued to look after design and engineering, I also then managed to do diversity and inclusion for radio and all of the BBC's corporate services like HR and finance and legal and things like that. So I then went back to the private sector and I worked at Deloitte, one of the big four accountancy firms, for a couple of years, really because they had a real focus on culture change, on creating a culture of respect and inclusion within the firm. And I wanted to get more experience around culture change. So I've written a book called Inclusive Growth, and the book is a really practical framework for business leaders, whether you're a small business or whether you're a medium business or a large business. It's a really practical way of implementing diversity and inclusion, and it's available on Amazon if you want to get a copy of that. It's called Inclusive Growth. So Some of the challenges that I often find for small and medium-sized businesses when it comes to implementing diversity and inclusion when I talk to them. So firstly, a lot of organizations say that they've got limited budgets and resources when it comes to implementing diversity and inclusion. Is it possible to implement diversity and inclusion with, with a small budget, for example, or if you've got a small team of people? One of the other challenges that I often hear small and medium-sized businesses saying is that there's just lots of competing priorities. So not only is there just business as usual in terms of being able to provide your products and services and keeping the business going with a small team of people, there's additional pressures like the coronavirus, which is a challenge for many businesses currently. And the third challenge that I often hear small and medium-sized businesses talking about is that they just don't know where to begin when it comes to implementing diversity and inclusion, and that often holds them back because they feel a bit inundated with all of the options. Do they focus on ethnicity, for example? Do they do something around gender or disability? So I think I wanted to kind of share with you three sort of things that you could start to do, and I think the first thing to do is to kind of just raise awareness of diversity and inclusion within your organization and also get educated on some of the topics. And depending on your learning style, there's loads of ways that you can do this. You can watch TED Talks, which are one of my personal favorites, loads of YouTube videos, books that you can read on all sorts of diversity and inclusion topics. And you can, if you just put into Amazon search box diversity and inclusion, you'll get loads of results back. But I think one of the things that you do need to think about is, why is diversity and inclusion important to your business personally? There's a lot of kind of generic business cases out there, like diversity and inclusion helps with better problem solving. It helps with creating better innovation, creativity, employee retention, being able to relate to your diverse customer base, and being able to provide, products and services to them. And you can get, for example, McKinsey they've done now 3 fantastic reports about the business case on diversity and inclusion. But it's really important to think about why it's important to your organization. And I frame this in terms of inclusive growth. And that's why I wrote the book. So how does diversity and inclusion enable your business to grow and make it personal to you and your business? I think it's then important that you go out and talk to your people, really to identify what speed humps and roadblocks are perhaps preventing people from working with you, or preventing people or slowing them down in terms of their career progression. So if you can start to identify some of those challenges, you can then start to do some co-creation with your team to really put in some solutions. So, do you have a parent, for example, in your organization who is struggling with managing work-life balance with their caring responsibilities, for example? Do you have somebody, for example, with a hidden disability like dyslexia, who doesn't have the right equipment to be able to help them thrive in their role? So things like that. So kind of solutions are raising awareness and getting educated, thinking about why diversity and inclusion is important to your business and making it personal for you. Going out and talking to your employees about identifying those speed humps and roadblocks. And then the fourth point really is investing some training with your managers, in doing some inclusive leadership training with your team so that they become sort of more inclusive managers in their day-to-day work. So why is this all important, and why are we doing this particular topic today? Well, this week is National Inclusion Week. So it's really great that Intuit QuickBooks are putting on this particular topic to kick off the week. I think also, over the last few months, coronavirus has really highlighted some social inequalities in our society. So we've seen lots of news stories about things like, disproportionate impact of coronavirus on people from an ethnic minority background. We've seen stories like, women having to leave the workforce because, they've got the caring responsibilities, and we're seeing, more women leaving the workforce in terms of redundancies from coronavirus than men, for example. So there are some social inequalities that we need to address. But I also think that, as a country, we're going through a very difficult time. Some people, obviously there's some personal challenges that people are facing, and it's not a good time for people personally. But as an economy, we will bounce back from this. And I think that small and medium-sized enterprises really have a really important part to play in this. So, 99.9% of the business population work within small and medium-sized enterprises. So SMEs have a real, impact in terms of the inclusivity of our workplaces across the country. So this week, please do take the opportunity to raise awareness of diversity and inclusion within your organization and amongst your colleagues. Go out and talk to your employees about some of the challenges that they've been facing from a diversity and inclusion perspective, and then maybe come up with one or two things that you could start to work on. So I'm going to take some questions now. So the first question that we've got is Joanna from Twitter, a direct message. Joanna says, "Hiya, Toby. If an employee publicly protests, should an employer support them like Britain's Got Talent did after diversity BLM performance?" So I think this is a really interesting question because it comes up quite a few times for me, actually. So I think employers play a really important role in supporting their employees. I'm not entirely sure what you mean if an employee publicly protests, but I'm going to make an assumption that one of your employees, for example, makes a comment on Twitter, as an example. I think it really is important that employers support their employees through, if they're facing any sort of difficulties or challenging times when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Now, you might, I think it depends on the situation, because if an employee is talking, say, unfavorably about your business and about their experiences of, saying, being in a minority group within your organization, that could be quite a difficult thing for you to manage, because obviously, we're also having to think about your public reputation as well. But I think if employees are generally making comments about, addressing social inequalities and their support for things like Black Lives Matter and movements like that, then I really do think it's important for employees to support their employers, to support their employees in topics like that. Employees, if they feel like they're supported on matters that are important to them, then they're much more likely to be engaged, a much more engaged employee. So I think it's important to support them. So Corey from Facebook Messenger says, "Hi, I work for a company that hasn't yet much done in terms of inclusion. What can I, as an employee, do to address the importance of inclusion?" So I think that's another good question, Corey. When I work with my clients, I often say there needs to be kind of like a top-down and a bottom-up approach to implementing diversity and inclusion. So often organizations, from a bottom-up perspective, is that they might create a diversity and inclusion council or inclusion network, or if an organization is big enough, they might create a network of employees around particular interests. So they might have a kind of a women's network, or an ethnic minority network, or a disability network. That we call these affiliate networks because they're affiliated with a particular group or topic. So I think as an employee, one thing that you can do is, if these networks don't exist, then you could talk to your employer about setting up a network, getting a bunch of employees together to talk about diversity and inclusion for the organization. I also think that if it's something that your employer hasn't considered at all, then if you're able to, try and orchestrate a conversation with your senior management team about the importance of diversity and inclusion for the business. So, I mentioned in my intro that I focus around inclusive growth. And the reason why I talk about inclusive growth is because I wanted to move the conversation away from diversity and inclusion being like a kind of a box ticking exercise or something that organizations feel that they should be doing because it's, the socially responsible thing that they should be doing, which is true. But I wanted organizations to think more strategically about how does diversity and inclusion enable their business to grow. Now, growth can mean different things to different businesses. So I've worked with the police force recently, and growth for them is about better policing outcomes, better relationships with members of their community. I've also been working with an electronics retailer, and growth for them is about selling more products online to their diverse customer base. So, have that conversation with your senior management team and see if you can get their interest, because that really is the beginning of the kind of the catalyst of the change. But also see if you can get some employees together to create, to be a bit of a group. So there's another message, so May from Twitter, direct message. May says, hi, I'm curious to know your view on job titles, if they can affect diversity and inclusion, positive or negative. I'm hiring my first 2 employees soon, so it's been on my mind. That's a really, really good question. So I think generally, I haven't seen too much evidence about the impact of job titles on diversity inclusion or attracting diverse candidates. But what there is a lot of evidence around is the use of language in things like your job ads and your job descriptions that you put out online. So at its most basic, there's kind of gendered language. So we know that there's terminology that you can use in your job descriptions or your job ads that can turn people off based whether they have kind of feminine or masculine traits. Now, there's a really good tool that you can use called Textio, which is Textio. They do a free trial. So what you can do is just copy and paste your job ad into that product, and it will analyze the wording that you're using, and it will tell you if you're using masculine or feminine language. It gives you kind of a score, like a percentage score, and a red, amber, green status, which is quite handy. And it will tell you how you can switch language. So it might say something like, now it's completely escaped me. But if you're using particular masculine terms, for example, it will tell you how you can sort of make it more gender neutral. And the idea is that you get more people clicking on your apply now button. I did this at the BBC. We actually did it the manual way. We didn't use the software. We did see an increase in diverse candidates applying for jobs by just looking at the language that we were using. So I think if you use language in a job title, like software ninja, for example, we know that language like ninja is masculine, and it might turn off people who are, say, have feminine characteristics in applying in that job. But yeah, that's my general point around looking at the language there. So now we got a message from Leonardo from Instagram. Leonardo says, do you think there should always be a policy about things people wear? Everything from burqas to Christian crosses can make for controversial office if one person gets offended. Yeah, that's a really interesting comment, because there's been some really high profile cases around employment tribunals, for example, wearing crosses at work, or wearing burqas and things like that. I think generally speaking, my kind of philosophy is that we need to be inclusive in terms of things like dress codes. And I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. There is the Equality Act, which does protect people from discrimination. And, it could be that if you have a particular policy that is stipulating, what people wear or don't wear, then you could be getting in trouble with the Equality Act in terms of discrimination. I think what I'm more concerned about is the much more kind of subtler messages that organizations give out. And these can actually be unwritten policies, which we might call norms, for example. So it might be, that there's just a generally accepted way of people, what people wear to work, that it's not written down anywhere, but people need to wear a suit to work, for example. Now, I've worked with organizations who've said, the dress code policy is that you dress to match your client, for example. That if you're going to go and work with a client, say in the media sector, and they wear jeans and t-shirts to work, then you would match them. But then if you go and work in a bank somewhere that may wear suits, then you match their style of dressing. But I think in terms of inclusion, we need to think about things like, say somebody who's gender fluid, or they might change how they identify with their gender might change from one day to the next, and therefore they might want to present differently when they go to work in the morning. So, do you have it built into your organization somewhere that's okay, and people can do that? Do you have, for example, somebody in the organization who's autistic, and wearing certain types of clothing is not really comfortable for them? Take me, for example. I'm sat in a wheelchair. Wearing a suit in a wheelchair is actually quite difficult. Suits are really not designed for people sitting down all of the time. And so when I worked in professional corporate environment, I really didn't like wearing a suit. So I didn't wear a suit. I just wore, kind of a shirt and tie, and then, I kind of wore a jumper over the top rather than a suit jacket. But my employers were accepting of that, and that was an inclusive way of doing it. So got another question here from Stuart from Facebook Messenger. So Stuart says, "Good morning. I'm looking for a new office space, and it's been crucial for me since I started my business to think about inclusion and diversity. Do you think the layout or design of the office space can be designed to support this? And if so, what should I think about?" Yeah, Stuart, that's a really good question, actually. So inclusive design when it comes to office environments is really important. So we can look at things like, what I would think is basic things like wheelchair access. So, can somebody in a wheelchair, access your office, or do you have stairs going up to the front door? That kind of thing. If you have any concerns, then you can just kind of get an access consultant or an access auditor to come and look at your building to do an assessment of how accessible or inclusive it is. Then I think there's other things that we don't often talk about. So, we talk a lot, I talk to my clients around neurodiversity, for example, which includes people on the autism spectrum, and about how offices are really kind of set up to help them succeed. So, for example, do you have a mixture of places where people can work depending on different work styles? So, do you have quiet places where, say, people who are autistic can go and work if they've got, say, sensitivities to noise or sound? But that's also really helpful for people who just want to, spend an hour focusing on writing a report because they've got a tight deadline to meet. So I think one of the best ways to start is by actually talking to your employees to find out how they use the space, but also to find out what some of their challenges are when it comes to the office environment. So some people, you might have parents in the organization that say, that they want somewhere to go for breast milk, for example. You might have somebody in the organization who's diabetic, and they want somewhere quiet to go in order to take insulin injections. So there's all sorts of things, and I think it starts with talking to your employees and understanding out how they use the space and how you can make that space more inclusive. So I've got a message from Stephanie from Instagram. So Stephanie says, in terms of pay gaps, what do you think organizations can do to make employees feel like they're being treated equally? I think the first thing to do, specifically when it comes to pay gaps, is to actually, publish your pay gap, whether you meet the threshold or not. So at the moment, organizations that employ more than 250 people need to publish their gender pay gap. Now, there's nothing to stop an organization employing less than 250 people to publish their pay gap. They could publish it internally amongst their employees. They could publish it externally on their website or on social media. But I think it starts with calculating the gender pay gap, understanding what the gender pay gap is, and then understanding why that pay gap exists. And then start to talk to your employees about how you're going to close that gender pay gap. So hopefully that helps there. We've got a message from Isaac from Twitter. So Isaac says, I often feel like it's trendy topics that are addressed in companies and other issues with inclusion and diversity are forgotten when something new arises. Is this something you see as an issue, and what can companies, small and large, do about it? Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Isaac. So I think basically it can be seen as a bit of a trendy topic, and I think one of the things that you can do is to make sure that it just becomes business as usual, that you reposition the conversation about it being the growth of the organization. And I often say that I want diversity and inclusion to be in business like what health and safety is. Everybody knows what their responsibility is when it comes to health and safety. Everybody takes it seriously. Everybody knows why it's important. I don't think that diversity and inclusion has yet reached that level of maturity, but I really hope that it does. So we're just going to come to a close now. I can't believe the last half an hour has just completely whizzed by. So I'm just going to share the poll response with you. So I'm going to reveal the poll response. And so the question that we asked you was, do you have a good understanding of how to create a workplace of inclusion? Now, 29% of you said yes, and 71% of you said no. I think that's a really interesting response. It doesn't surprise me, if I'm honest. One of the big questions that I often hear back from organizations, large and small, is that they know why diversity and inclusion is important, but they just don't know how to go about doing it. So hopefully I've been able to give you some advice on the call this morning to help you move towards a more inclusive workplace. But actually it begins with raising awareness and getting educated on the topic. So, there's loads of books and videos online that you can read, but actually go and talk to the people in your organization, find out what the speed humps and the roadblocks are when it comes to feeling included in the organization, feeling like they belong in the organization, and then go about starting to remove those speed humps and roadblocks. And, by all means, reach out to me if you need any support with that. So if you've got any questions, please do get in touch with QuickBooks support team on Facebook. And if you want to contact me, you can send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can visit my website, which is www.mildon.co.uk. So coming up on Ask the Expert tomorrow, we've got Aaron Patrick, who is a UK Intuit QuickBooks certified trainer. And he's also head of accounts at Bofex. Aaron has a great YouTube channel called Aaron Patrick, the QuickBooks chap, where he gives you a tour into the world of QuickBooks online. Make sure you check that out. So as a reminder, if you need any more advice, please join the official Intuit QuickBooks SMB community group on Facebook. Accountants and business experts are on hand 24/7. Thank you ever so much for tuning in today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please go and celebrate National Inclusion Week. Thank you very much.